I'm Eleanor Campbell, 67, and I never thought I'd witness my own son become someone I couldn't recognize. That day at our family Thanksgiving, when Timothy proudly declared, "My wife Heather put Mom in her place so she'd finally shut up." While looking at me with cold eyes, I felt my world collapse. The dining room fell silent. Then my brother James stood up, his napkin dropping to the floor as his face turned crimson with rage. What happened next shattered our family beyond repair and exposed secrets we'd kept buried for 30 years. Before I continue with this painful story that changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty, I'd love to hear where you're watching from today. The journey I'm about to share might feel familiar to some of you dealing with family betrayal. If you've ever felt that knife twist of someone you raised turning against you, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about how families can heal even after the deepest wounds. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Timothy had always been my sensitive, thoughtful boy. Even as a child, he stood up for others, defended the underdog. I remember him at 10 years old, bringing home a classmate who was being bullied, declaring our home a safe space before that term was even common. His father, Robert, and I had raised him to be kind, to value family above all else. When Robert died of cancer 12 years ago, Timothy was my rock. He held my hand through the funeral arrangements, stayed with me that first terrible week, and called me every single day for months afterward. That's why his transformation was so bewildering and painful. The son who once embodied compassion had become someone who could publicly humiliate his own mother. Timothy met Heather during his junior year of college. She was studying psychology, which seemed fitting given her ability to read people. When he first brought her home, I was delighted. Heather was polite, helped with dishes without being asked, and seemed genuinely interested in our family photos and stories. She complimented my home, asked about my volunteer work, and even brought me a thoughtful gift, a bird feeder, because Timothy had mentioned how much I enjoyed watching cardinals in my garden. "Mom, I think she's the one," Timothy whispered to me that first Christmas she joined us, and I hugged him tightly, genuinely happy for my son. The changes were so gradual that I barely noticed them at first. Timothy began calling less frequently. His visits home decreased from weekly to monthly to only on holidays. When I'd call him, Heather would often answer, explaining that Timothy was busy but would return my call later. Sometimes he did. Increasingly, he didn't. James, my younger brother by 3 years, lived just 20 minutes away from me after his divorce from Barbara. We'd always been close, but after Robert died, James stepped up in ways I never expected. He mowed my lawn without being asked, dropped by with coffee on Sunday mornings, and always made himself available when I needed a companion for family events. "Something's not right with Timothy," James mentioned during one of our Sunday coffees, about 2 years after Timothy and Heather married. "Have you noticed how he barely speaks when she's around? It's like he's waiting for her approval before he answers anything." I defended them, of course. "They're just finding their rhythm as a couple," I said. "All marriages have adjustment periods." But James was more perceptive than I allowed myself to be. "Ellie, it's more than that. Did you see how he tensed up when she entered the room at Easter? That's not normal." Barbara, James's ex-wife, had always been competitive with me. Even during their marriage, family gatherings had an undercurrent of tension as Barbara tried to outdo my cooking, my home decor, even the gifts I gave. After their divorce, I expected her to distance herself from family gatherings. But surprisingly, she maintained close relationships with several of my relatives, often scheduling competing events on the same days as mine. Thanksgiving had always been special in our family. Robert and I had hosted it every year of our marriage, and I continued the tradition after his death. Our large dining table, which Robert had crafted by hand, seated 16 comfortably, and I took pride in bringing the family together around it. The day was filled with traditions. Robert's cranberry sauce recipe, the gratitude candle we'd pass around the table, the after-dinner walk to the park. In the early years of their marriage, Heather participated enthusiastically in these traditions. She even suggested a new one, a family photo by the fireplace each year, which we all embraced. But gradually, her enthusiasm waned. She'd arrive late with Timothy, leave early, or spend much of the gathering texting on her phone. "Mom, Heather's not feeling well," Timothy would explain. Or, "We promised her parents we'd stop by, or Heather has an early meeting tomorrow. The excuses varied, but the pattern was clear. Our family gatherings were no longer a priority. The tension around my decision to sell the family home brought everything to a breaking point. After 10 years alone in the 4-bedroom colonial where we'd raised Timothy, the maintenance had become too much. The stairs were challenging for my arthritic knees, and the utility bills ate into my fixed income. "I'm thinking of selling the house," I mentioned casually during a rare visit from Timothy and Heather. "Maybe finding a nice one-story place closer to town." The reaction was immediate and shocking. Heather's head snapped up from her phone. "You can't sell this house," she said firmly. "It's Timothy's inheritance." Timothy nodded in agreement. "Mom, we've always talked about this house staying in the family. I thought the plan was for us to move in when you can't manage anymore." We had never discussed such a plan. In fact, Timothy had often complained about the house being too far from the city where he and Heather worked. James, who was helping me fix a leaky faucet that day, emerged from the bathroom in time to hear this exchange. His eyes met mine, concern evident. Later, after they'd left, he voiced what I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge. "They're watching your money, Ellie. That's what this is about. Have you noticed how they suddenly got interested in your finances after you mentioned that investment matured?" I had noticed, but admitting it meant accepting a painful truth about my son and his wife. That fateful Thanksgiving began like any other, with me up before dawn to prepare the turkey. James arrived early to help, bringing fresh rolls from the bakery and a bouquet of autumn flowers. "You didn't have to bring flowers," I said, touched by the gesture. "Well, someone should bring my big sister flowers," he replied, placing them in a vase on the counter. By 2 o'clock, the house was filling with family. My niece Stephanie and her husband Mark arrived with their 2 children. My cousin Linda and her partner Susan brought their famous apple pie. My late husband's brother Thomas and his wife Catherine came with a bottle of wine and their adult son William. The atmosphere was warm and festive as delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. At 3:30, half an hour after our agreed-upon dining time, Timothy and Heather finally arrived. No apology was offered for their tardiness. Heather wore a designer dress that seemed excessive for our casual family gathering, while Timothy looked uncomfortable in a suit I'd never seen before. "You're late," James remarked, not unkindly, as he took their coats. "Traffic?" Timothy mumbled, though we all knew they lived just 20 minutes away. "Well, we had to look presentable," Heather added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Some of us make an effort for family gatherings." The comment, aimed at my casual slacks and holiday sweater, stung more than it should have. During appetizers, the conversation remained strained but civil. Heather dominated discussions, interrupting others and redirecting topics to herself. Timothy rarely spoke, except to agree with his wife. I noticed James watching them intently, his expression growing increasingly concerned. Once seated at the dining table, I tried to lighten the mood by sharing fond memories. I pulled out an old photo album I'd found while cleaning that week. "Look at this," I said, opening to a page with Timothy around age 8. Timothy's 3rd-grade play. He was so passionate about being the lead tree. A few family members chuckled warmly. "Remember how you wanted to be a teacher back then?" I continued, smiling at my son. "You used to line up your stuffed animals and give them lessons." Before Timothy could respond, Heather cut in. "Timothy never wanted to be a teacher. He's always been interested in business." "I think you're confusing him with someone else, Eleanor. Your memory isn't what it used to be." "I'm not confused," I replied gently. "Timothy talked about teaching until his sophomore year of college, when he switched majors." Timothy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mom, Heather's right. I was just playing around as a kid. I never seriously considered teaching." But he had. He'd even volunteered at an after-school program in high school, coming home full of stories about the children he'd helped with math. "You always wanted to help others," I insisted, feeling strangely desperate to reclaim this truth about my son. "You had such a compassionate heart." Heather laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Timothy helps people through business. He doesn't need to wipe runny noses to make a difference. Not everyone wants to live small like you did, Eleanor." The table fell silent. Even Heather seemed to realize she'd crossed a line. I tried to change the subject. "How was your trip to Bermuda last month?" The photos looked lovely. It was fine, Timothy replied curtly. More than fine, Heather corrected. It was exactly what we needed after dealing with so much family stress. Some people don't understand how draining it can be to constantly manage everyone's expectations. Nobody's expecting anything unreasonable, James interjected. Just basic respect. Heather turned to him, eyes narrowed. You know, James, as someone who couldn't even maintain his own marriage, you're hardly qualified to comment on our relationships. Barbara had cheated on James, a painful fact the family never discussed openly. James flushed but maintained his composure. We're talking about how you speak to Eleanor, not my past. Oh, please, Heather scoffed. Eleanor loves playing the victim, the helpless widow who can't possibly take care of herself. She's been manipulating Timothy with guilt for years. I felt as though I'd been slapped. I've never tried to manipulate anyone, I said quietly. I just miss my son. See? Heather turned to Timothy triumphantly. Classic guilt trip. Timothy's face hardened as he looked at me. She's right, Mom. You're always trying to make me feel bad for having my own life. For not doing things your way. That's not true, I whispered, feeling tears threatening. It is true, Timothy's voice rose. You've been trying to control me my entire life. Thank God Heather helped me see it. Then came the moment that changed everything. Timothy looked around the table, seeking allies, and proudly declared, My wife put her in her place, so she'd finally shut up. The silence that followed was absolute. Every face registered shock, except Heather's, which bore a small, satisfied smile. Then my brother James stood up, his napkin dropping to the floor. His face flushed with anger. He pointed at Timothy. You need to apologize to your mother right now, or what? Timothy challenged, standing to face his uncle. Or I'll tell everyone exactly what you two have been up to, James replied, his voice dangerously calm. Confusion crossed Timothy's face. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about, James responded. The documents, the account access, all of it. Heather's smile vanished. You're making things up because you've always been jealous of Timothy's success. Am I? James pulled out his phone. Should I show Eleanor the emails? The ones where you discuss getting her declared incompetent? Or maybe the power of attorney forms Timothy signed using her name. Gasps erupted around the table. Timothy paled visibly. This is ridiculous, Heather declared, standing abruptly. We don't have to listen to these accusations. Timothy, we're leaving. Several family members stood in confusion. Thomas tried to intervene, suggesting everyone calm down. Catherine began gathering children to take them to another room. Linda openly wept at the table. As Timothy and Heather stormed toward the door, James called after them. Running away won't make the evidence disappear, Timothy. Think about what you're doing. The door slammed behind them, leaving the remaining family in stunned silence. I think we should go, Thomas said quietly, and others murmured in agreement. Within 20 minutes, only James and I remained in the house, full of uneaten food and abandoned place settings. After everyone left, I sank into Robert's old armchair, too numb to even cry. James sat across from me, his anger now replaced with concern. I'm so sorry, Ellie, he said softly. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. I wanted to tell you privately first. Tell me what, exactly? My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, hollow and distant. James hesitated, running a hand through his graying hair. I've been investigating Timothy and Heather for the past few months. Investigating? What are you talking about? He took a deep breath. It started when you mentioned selling the house. Something about their reaction seemed off. Then I noticed how they suddenly became interested in your investment portfolio, your insurance policies, even your medical appointments. James got up and retrieved his briefcase from the hallway. From it, he pulled a manila folder thick with papers. I hired someone, he admitted, a private investigator. I know that sounds extreme, but the way Timothy has been acting, I was worried. A private investigator? I repeated, disbelieving. To spy on my son? To protect you, James corrected gently. And I'm glad I did. He handed me the folder. Heather has been systematically isolating Timothy from everyone who cares about him. She's convinced him that you're trying to control him, that you're mentally declining, even that you're stealing from him. With shaking hands, I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails between Timothy and Heather, text messages, financial documents, and notes from the investigator. "This one," James said, pointing to an email dated 3 months earlier, "is where they discuss getting you evaluated for cognitive impairment. Heather suggests finding a sympathetic doctor who could declare you unable to manage your own affairs." I read the words in my son's email. "Mom's getting more confused. She forgot her PIN at the bank again. Maybe it's time to talk to Dr. Miller about that evaluation." But I hadn't forgotten my PIN. The bank had issued me a new card with a different number, something I'd explained to Timothy at the time. "And here," James continued, showing me another document, "is a power of attorney form with your signature." Except the investigator confirmed it's not your signature. It's a forgery. I stared at the familiar-looking signature, noticing subtle differences from my own handwriting. The implication was unthinkable. "Timothy wouldn't do this," I whispered, even as the evidence sat in my lap. "He might not fully understand what he's doing," James said. The investigator discovered that Heather has a history of this behavior. Her previous boyfriend's family reported similar concerns: isolation, financial control, forgery. No charges were ever filed, but there were complaints. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, tears finally coming. "I confronted Timothy last week," James admitted. "I thought if I showed him the evidence privately, he'd come to his senses. But he denied everything, said I was making it up because I was jealous of his success. The same thing Heather said today. He threatened to cut off all contact if I told you anything." I remembered how Timothy had canceled our weekly phone call the previous week, claiming work obligations. The investigator found more. "Ellie," James continued gently, "Heather has been going through your mail. She's been accessing your online accounts. There's evidence she's been transferring small amounts from your savings to their joint account for months." "Why?" I asked, the betrayal almost too much to comprehend. "We're not wealthy. My savings aren't that significant. It's your house they want," James explained. "It's worth close to $1 million in today's market. The neighborhood has become very desirable. There are emails where they discuss selling it after." He hesitated. "After they get guardianship of you." The room seemed to spin around me. My son, my kind, compassionate Timothy, had been planning to have me declared incompetent, take control of my assets, and sell my home against my wishes. "We need to decide what to do," James said after giving me time to process. "We have enough evidence for legal action. Financial elder abuse is a serious crime. But I know that's not a decision to make lightly. I can't have my son arrested," I whispered. "I understand," James nodded. "But we need to protect you, Ellie. This isn't going to stop just because they got caught. If anything, they might escalate now that they know I'm onto them." As the shock began to wear off, anger slowly took its place. Not just at Heather, who I'd begun to suspect was manipulating the situation, but at Timothy. My son was a grown man who had made his choices. Choices that betrayed everything we had ever taught him about family, about honesty, about basic human decency. "I need time to think," I said finally. "But first, I need to change my accounts, my passwords, everything." James squeezed my hand. "I'll help you. We'll get through this together." As we sat in my too-quiet house on the ruins of Thanksgiving, I couldn't help wondering when exactly I had lost my son and if there was any way to get him back. In the days that followed, I found myself obsessively reviewing the past 5 years, identifying warnings I had stubbornly ignored. The signs had been there all along, flashing like neon in the darkness, but I had refused to see them. It started with small things. Timothy stopped calling me spontaneously. Our conversations became scheduled, perfunctory. When I called him unexpectedly, he seemed anxious, frequently mentioning that Heather was waiting for him or needed his help with something. I remembered a Christmas 3 years earlier when Timothy and Heather arrived with obviously re-gifted presents, a scarf still in the department store box with a gift receipt dated months earlier, showing it had been purchased for someone named Jennifer. When I thanked them anyway, Heather had said, "Well, it's not like you need anything. Your generation has accumulated too much stuff already." Timothy had laughed as though it were a joke. Then there was the time I overheard Heather in my kitchen during a family barbecue. I'd gone inside to get more ice and paused outside the doorway when I heard my name. "Eleanor is so stuck in the past," Heather was saying to Timothy. All these old family photos everywhere. Robert's clothes still in the closet. It's morbid. And the way she clings to you, calling all the time, always having some crisis that needs your attention. Classic, narcissistic mother behavior. Instead of defending me, Timothy had sighed and replied, I know. It's exhausting, but what can I do? She's alone. She's alone because she drives everyone away, Heather had answered. Remember what happened with her friend Carol? Eleanor scared her off too. Carol had moved to Arizona to be near her grandchildren. We still exchanged Christmas cards and occasional calls. There had been no falling out. But in that moment, I'd been too shocked by their conversation to enter the kitchen and correct this falsehood. Instead, I'd quietly returned to the backyard, the ice forgotten, my heart heavier than before. Financial help began innocently enough. Timothy offered to set up automatic bill payments for me after I mentioned misplacing an electric bill. It'll be easier, Mom, he insisted. I can help you keep track of everything online. I'd given him my account information, password, even my social security number. He'd shown me how to log in, but the process seemed unnecessarily complicated. Eventually, I just let him handle it, grateful for the help. Now I understood why he'd made the system seem so difficult to navigate. He hadn't wanted me checking those accounts independently. Family heirlooms began disappearing too. My mother's pearl necklace, which I kept in my jewelry box for special occasions. Robert's watch collection. Even small things, like the silver serving spoon that had belonged to my grandmother. When I mentioned the missing items, Heather would say, Oh, Eleanor, you gave that to us last year, don't you remember? You said you wanted Timothy to have his father's watches now, instead of waiting. I hadn't. I would never have given away Robert's watches without making it a meaningful moment between mother and son. But Timothy backed Heather's claims, leaving me questioning my own memory. Other family members had tried to warn me. My niece Stephanie had pulled me aside at a wedding reception 2 years ago. Aunt Eleanor, I'm worried about Timothy, she'd confided. He seems different with Heather. Have you noticed how he checks with her before answering any question? How he never spends time alone with any of us anymore? I dismissed her concerns. They're just very connected as a couple. That's good in a marriage. Stephanie had persisted. It's more than that. Mark and I ran into them at a restaurant downtown last month. Timothy looked like he was going to come over and say hello, but Heather literally pulled him away by the arm. When I texted him later, he replied that they'd been in a hurry to make a movie, but we saw them still sitting there an hour later as we left. I'd made excuses then, too. Maybe they got delayed. Maybe the movie time changed. I thought of the family photos Timothy had asked to borrow for a project. Irreplaceable images of 4 generations that never returned to my albums. When I'd asked about them, Timothy claimed I'd told him he could keep them. Another memory I supposedly fabricated. I remembered Timothy's childhood bedroom, which I'd maintained for years after he moved out. One day I came home to find Heather had organized it, boxing up his trophies, removing posters from walls, donating books without asking. When I expressed distress, Timothy accused me of overreacting. It's just stuff, Mom. Heather's right. You need to declutter. The room became a guest room that no guests ever used, stripped of all evidence of the boy who had once lived there. My isolation had grown gradually. Timothy and Heather began scheduling competing events on days they knew I had planned family gatherings. They'd invite my relatives to their home for brunch before my annual Easter dinner, ensuring everyone arrived at my house already full and tired. Or they'd plan a movie night that drew away the younger generation from my Christmas Eve tradition. Timothy's childhood home, the home his father and I had saved for years to buy, the home where he'd taken his first steps and lost his first tooth, had become something to acquire rather than cherish. I remembered how, after I mentioned selling, Timothy and Heather had shown up unannounced one Saturday with a real estate friend who offered to give me a fair market assessment. When I declined, saying I wasn't ready yet, their disappointment had been palpable. The market might turn, Heather had warned. You don't want to miss your window, Eleanor. My window. My house. My decision. Yet somehow I'd become an obstacle in their path. I thought about Robert, about what he would say if he could see our son now. The man who had taught Timothy to always tell the truth, to stand up for those weaker than himself, to value family above material possessions. What would he think of the son who now lied to his mother's face and plotted to take her home? As painful as these realizations were, They brought clarity. I hadn't imagined the changes in my son. I hadn't been oversensitive or controlling. Something had happened to Timothy, something that had fundamentally altered his character. And while I couldn't absolve him of responsibility for his choices, I had to consider whether Heather's influence had corrupted his natural goodness. Most of all, I had to admit my own role in enabling their behavior. By staying silent, by accepting excuses, by doubting my own perceptions, I had allowed this situation to develop. My desire to preserve peace had ultimately led to war. My refusal to confront uncomfortable truths had given them power. Looking back at all these warning signs, I knew I had to make different choices moving forward. For Timothy's sake, as much as my own. I wonder if any of you watching have experienced something similar with your family. Those moments where you realized you'd been ignoring red flags because the truth was too painful to face. It's not easy to admit when we've been in denial, is it? If you've ever had that shocking moment of clarity about a loved one, I'd appreciate knowing I'm not alone in this journey. Now, let me tell you what happened when the rest of our family found out the truth. The aftermath of Thanksgiving hit our family like a grenade, fragmenting us into opposing camps. Timothy and Heather launched a preemptive strike, contacting relatives before James and I had even decided how to proceed. Their version of events portrayed me as mentally declining, and James as manipulative, jealous of their success, and trying to turn me against my own son. "Grandma Eleanor needs help," Heather wrote in a group text to the extended family. "We've been trying to support her privately, but her confusion is getting worse. She's become paranoid, accusing us of stealing from her. James is encouraging these delusions instead of getting her the help she needs. We're heartbroken." Some family members called me immediately, concerned about my well-being, but also clearly testing my lucidity. Others accepted Timothy and Heather's narrative without question. My cousin Linda's partner, Susan, a social worker, tactfully inquired if I'd had a cognitive assessment recently. "I'm not confused," I told her firmly. "James has evidence of what they've been doing." "Evidence can be interpreted different ways," Susan replied gently. "Sometimes family conflicts create misunderstandings." James stood firmly by my side throughout this ordeal. He methodically documented everything, creating copies of the investigators' findings to counter the rumors Timothy and Heather were spreading. He changed the locks on my house and installed security cameras, concerned they might try to access my home while I was out. My niece Stephanie became an unexpected ally. She came to see me 3 days after Thanksgiving, visibly upset. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted, sitting at my kitchen table. 2 years ago, at Cousin William's wedding, Heather cornered me in the bathroom. She told me you'd been saying horrible things about me and Mark, that you thought we were taking advantage of my parents, that our children were ill-behaved. I nearly confronted you, but Mark said it didn't sound like you. Then last year, she told my mom something similar. I never said anything negative about you, I assured her, horrified. "I know that now." Stephanie nodded. "She's been playing us against each other, dropping little poisonous comments to isolate you. And we all fell for it." Stephanie's revelation led to discoveries from other family members. My brother-in-law, Thomas, called to apologize for believing Timothy's version initially. "Catherine just told me that Heather has been telling her you criticize her cooking behind her back," he explained. "She's been doing this divide and conquer thing with all of us, but not everyone was so easily convinced." My sister-in-law, Barbara, James's ex-wife, firmly took Timothy and Heather's side. She began organizing rival family gatherings, positioning herself as the stable, rational alternative to the family drama at my home. "No one expects you to admit you need help," Barbara told me during a rare phone call. "But for everyone's sake, especially Timothy's, you should just apologize. We all get older. We all need assistance eventually." "I don't need to apologize for being victimized," I replied, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. "And I certainly don't need to pretend I'm losing my mind to make Timothy and Heather more comfortable with their behavior." The Christmas holiday that year was painful beyond words. For the first time in my adult life, I spent it without my son. Timothy and Heather hosted a competing celebration at their home, and nearly half the family attended their gathering instead of my traditional Christmas Eve dinner. Those who came to my home walked on eggshells, carefully avoiding mention of Timothy or the Thanksgiving disaster. James tried his best to maintain holiday spirit, but the empty chair where Timothy should have been cast a shadow over our celebration. Then came the anonymous texts. Messages from unknown numbers, expressing concern about my well-being, suggesting I get help before it's too late, warning that no one will believe you over your own son. James reported these to the police, who took a report but said little could be done unless direct threats were made. In January, my father-in-law, Robert's father, passed away. The funeral became another battlefield. Timothy and Heather arrived late, dressed inappropriately, formally, and positioned themselves at the front of the family section as though they were the primary mourners. When I approached to speak with my late husband's mother, Timothy physically turned his back on me. Heather placed a protective arm around my mother-in-law, as though shielding her from me. "I can't believe you'd bring your drama to a funeral," Timothy hissed when I persisted in trying to offer condolences to my mother-in-law. "This isn't drama," I whispered back. "This is your grandfather's funeral, your father's father. You just can't stand not being the center of attention, can you?" He walked away, leaving me standing alone as other mourners watched uncomfortably. James confronted him in the parking lot afterward, presenting printed copies of some of the most damning emails the investigator had uncovered. "Deny it all you want," James told him, "but your cousins, your aunts and uncles, they deserve to know what you've been doing, what you're still trying to do." Heather called it a smear campaign. She created social media posts portraying herself as the victim of a jealous, controlling mother-in-law and bitter uncle. Without naming me directly, she shared articles about narcissistic family systems and dementia-related paranoia. Timothy shared these posts, adding comments about toxic family patterns and breaking cycles of manipulation. Friends I'd known for decades began calling, concerned about the public family meltdown. Some took Timothy's side, unable to reconcile the loving mother they knew with the manipulative monster Timothy described. Others stood firmly with me but admitted they found it all confusing and distressing. "I don't understand," my friend Margaret said during a tearful phone call. "Timothy was always such a sweet boy. What happened to him?" I had no answer. The son I'd raised seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone I barely recognized. By February, family members were being forced to choose sides. Invitations came with invisible but clear conditions. Those who maintained relationships with me were not welcome at Timothy and Heather's events, and vice versa. Young cousins who had grown up together found themselves severed by this invisible line. Holiday traditions fractured as the family split into opposing camps. James continued gathering evidence, working with the private investigator to document Timothy and Heather's actions. When he shared these findings with family members willing to listen, many began to see through the deception. Stephanie's parents, once hesitant to take sides, reached out after seeing the forged power of attorney document. "We had no idea it had gone this far," Stephanie's father said. "This isn't about different perspectives or misunderstandings. This is criminal." Slowly, painfully, family members began to see the truth. One by one, they contacted me with apologies, with expressions of support, with anger at having been manipulated. But each revelation brought fresh pain, not joy at being vindicated, but deep sorrow at understanding just how methodically my son and his wife had worked to destroy my reputation and relationships. The family I had once presided over as matriarch now lay in ruins around me, a landscape of broken trust and severed connections. And at the center of this destruction stood my son, the child I had raised with such love, now a stranger to me and to himself. By early March, the shock had worn off, replaced by a steely determination I hadn't felt since Robert's cancer diagnosis. Back then, I'd transformed from a supportive wife into a fierce advocate, questioning doctors, researching treatments, fighting for my husband's life with every resource I possessed. Now, I directed that same energy toward protecting myself and, in a different way, saving my son. My first step was securing my finances. James drove me to the bank where I'd held accounts for 30 years. The manager, who knew me well, was horrified by my situation. "Mrs. Campbell, we can add extra security measures to your accounts," he assured me. "And I'd strongly advise changing all your passwords, PINs, and security questions." I closed joint accounts Timothy had access to and opened new ones at a different bank. I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance policy, temporarily removing Timothy until the situation was resolved. Each action felt like another cut in an already bleeding wound, but I knew they were necessary. Next, I met with an elder law attorney James had researched carefully. Sarah Goldstein was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that immediately put me at ease. Unfortunately, Mrs. Campbell, what you're describing is not uncommon, she said after hearing my story. Elder financial abuse often comes from family members, and it's significantly underreported because of the shame and family complications involved. I don't want to press charges against my son, I explained. I just want to protect myself and hopefully get him away from Heather's influence. Sarah nodded sympathetically but spoke firmly. I understand that instinct completely, but we need to be realistic about what's happening. Your son is an adult, making his own choices. While his wife may be manipulating him, he's actively participating in this behavior. She helped me draft a new will with explicit protections against challenges to my competency. We filed restraining orders against both Timothy and Heather, barring them from accessing my financial institutions or medical providers. Sarah also helped me create a new power of attorney, naming James as my representative. What about my house? I asked. I still plan to sell it, but I'm afraid they'll try to interfere. We'll file the appropriate notices with county records, Sarah assured me, and I'd recommend moving forward with the sale sooner rather than later. The restraining order will prevent them from coming to the property during showings. The legal steps were straightforward compared to the emotional work. I began seeing Dr. Amelia Chen, a therapist specializing in family estrangement and elder abuse. Our weekly sessions became anchors in the stormy sea my life had become. You're mourning, Dr. Chen observed during our third session. Not just the relationship with Timothy now, but the future relationship you thought you'd have. The grandchildren you might never meet. The retirement years without your son's support. Her words unlocked something in me, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, I truly wept. Deep, body-shaking sobs that left me exhausted, but somehow lighter. I keep asking myself what I did wrong, I confessed. Where I failed as a mother. That's a natural reaction, Dr. Chen replied. But from everything you've told me, this isn't about your parenting. Some people are vulnerable to manipulation and control in relationships. Timothy may have had that vulnerability, despite your best efforts. James remained my steadfast ally throughout this process. He accompanied me to legal appointments, installed security systems at my home, and fielded calls from concerned family members to shield me from having to repeatedly explain the situation. You know you don't have to do all this, I told him one evening, as he fixed a loose railing on my porch steps. Yes, I do, he replied simply. You're my sister. Besides, you'd do the same for me. He was right. I would have. Family loyalty meant something to us. Not blind loyalty that excused wrongdoing, but the kind that showed up, that protected, that faced hard truths together. As I grew stronger, I decided to write Timothy a letter. Not an angry accusation, not a plea for reconciliation, but an honest expression of my love and disappointment. Dr. Chen helped me draft it, ensuring I avoided language that could be twisted or used against me. Dear Timothy, I wrote, I'm writing to tell you that despite everything that has happened, I love you. I always have and I always will. The son I raised was kind, honest, and compassionate. Qualities I still believe exist within you, even if they're currently obscured. I won't pretend to understand the choices you've made. The evidence of your actions is too clear to deny or explain away. You've betrayed my trust in fundamental ways, and that has consequences I cannot ignore. I've secured my finances and my home. I've filed legal protections that I never imagined needing against my own child. These steps bring me no joy, only necessary security. If you ever find yourself ready to acknowledge what's happened and take responsibility for your actions, I will listen. My door isn't permanently closed to you, but it cannot be open to deception and manipulation. I hope someday you'll remember who you really are, not who someone else has convinced you to be. Until then, I will love you from a distance and protect myself up close. Mom. I never received a response. The turning point came unexpectedly through Timothy's childhood friend Michael. He contacted me through James, asking to meet privately. I've been worried about Tim for years. Michael confided when we met at a coffee shop. He's not the same person anymore. Last month, he called me at 2 a.m., clearly drunk, talking about how trapped he feels, how he can't make his own decisions anymore. Michael explained that Timothy had shared concerns about Heather's control over their finances, her monitoring of his phone and email, her isolation tactics. But whenever Michael tried to discuss these issues soberly, Timothy would backtrack, insisting everything was fine. It's like he has moments of clarity, but then the fog closes in again, Michael said. When I mentioned your name, he broke down crying, Mrs. Campbell. Then the next day, he texted saying, I should never bring you up again if I wanted to remain friends. Michael's revelations gave me both hope and deeper concern. My son was caught in what appeared to be an emotionally abusive relationship, but he was also actively participating in abusing me. Both things could be true simultaneously, making the path forward even more complicated. I began researching coercive control and emotional abuse, recognizing patterns that matched Timothy and Heather's relationship. The isolation from friends and family, the financial control, the monitoring of communication, the rewriting of history and reality. He might be both victim and perpetrator, I told Dr. Chen during our next session. That's insightful and unfortunately common, she agreed. People being abused often participate in harming others, either because they're directed to do so or as a displacement of their own pain. It doesn't excuse his actions toward you, but it may help explain them. With Michael's help, we arranged a secret meeting with Timothy at a time when Heather believed he was meeting clients. James insisted on being nearby, sitting at a separate table in the restaurant to intervene if necessary. When Timothy arrived, he looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. He sat down across from me, his posture defensive. I can't stay long, he said immediately. And I don't understand why all the secrecy. Because I wanted to speak with my son, not the person you become around Heather, I replied gently. He flinched as though I'd slapped him. That's not fair, isn't it? The Timothy I raised would never have treated me the way you have these past years. He would never have tried to steal from his mother or have her declared incompetent. Timothy stared at his untouched water glass. It's complicated. Explain it to me then, I urged. Help me understand. What followed was a halting, sometimes contradictory confession. Timothy admitted to knowing about the forged documents, but claimed Heather had convinced him it was for my own protection. He acknowledged the plan to sell my house, but insisted they would have provided for me. He admitted to isolating me from family, but said it was because I was negative and stuck in the past. Then, unexpectedly, he began to cry. Not manipulative tears, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of a broken person. I don't know how it got this far, he whispered. I don't know who I am anymore. I reached across the table and took his hand. I do. You're my son. You've lost your way, but you're still my son. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the Timothy I remembered. Vulnerable, authentic, connecting. Then, as quickly as it appeared, a shutter seemed to close behind his eyes. Heather's pregnant, he said flatly. We're going to have a baby. I need to make things work with her. My heart both soared and sank at the news. A grandchild, something I'd longed for, but born into such a troubled situation. Congratulations, I said sincerely. But Timothy, bringing a child into your current situation won't fix the underlying problems. If anything, it makes addressing them more urgent. He withdrew his hand from mine. I need to go. She'll be wondering where I am. As he stood to leave, I made one last attempt. Timothy, there are people who can help. Resources for both of you. Please consider reaching out. He paused, not looking at me. I'll think about it, he said, and walked away. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't even a clear step forward. But for the first time in years, I'd spoken to my actual son, not the persona he adopted around Heather. It was a crack in the facade, a tiny opening that might, with time and patience, allow light to enter. 3 weeks after my clandestine meeting with Timothy, I received an unexpected phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end introduced himself as Michael, Timothy's childhood friend, whom I'd met at the coffee shop. Mrs. Campbell, I need to talk to you in person, he said, his voice tense. It's important. Can we meet somewhere private? We arranged to meet at a small bookstore cafe across town, somewhere Heather would never go. James insisted on joining us, concerned this might be some kind of trap. When we arrived, Michael was already seated in a corner booth, nervously shredding a napkin. He looked up with visible relief when he saw us. Thank you for coming, he said as we sat down. Something's happened, and I didn't know who else to turn to. Michael explained that Timothy had called him at midnight 2 days earlier, sounding desperate. Heather had found out about our secret meeting and had erupted in a rage, throwing things, threatening to leave with their unborn child, and accusing Timothy of betraying her. He locked himself in the bathroom to call me, Michael said. He was whispering, terrified she'd hear him. He said she went through his credit card statement and saw the restaurant charge, then checked his location history on his phone and realized he wasn't where he claimed to be. Is he safe? I asked immediately, maternal concern overriding everything else. Physically, yes, I think so, Michael replied. But emotionally? He's falling apart. He told me things I've suspected but never heard him admit before. How she checks his phone multiple times a day. How she has all his passwords. How she tells him what to wear, who to talk to, even what to order at restaurants. James frowned. That sounds like classic controlling behavior, but it doesn't excuse what he's done to Eleanor. I know, Michael nodded. That's the complicated part. Tim admitted he's done terrible things, especially to you, Mrs. Campbell. He said Heather convinced him you were trying to control him, that you were mentally declining and might harm yourself or others. She showed him articles about elderly dementia, pointing out symptoms she claimed to observe in you, none of which were real, I said quietly. No, Michael agreed. But Tim believed her because she's a psychology major. She presented herself as the expert, identifying signs that weren't there. And whenever Tim questioned her assessment, she'd accuse him of not caring about your welfare. The manipulation was both obvious and insidious. Heather had used Timothy's love for me as a weapon against both of us. The pregnancy complicated everything, Michael continued. Tim was already having doubts, already seeing concerning patterns in their relationship. But when Heather announced she was pregnant, he felt trapped. He couldn't leave the mother of his child. So where does this leave us? James asked pragmatically. Timothy's still participating in this behavior, still enabling her actions against Eleanor. Michael hesitated before responding. He wants out. That's what he told me on the phone. He said, I need to get out, but I don't know how. Then Heather started banging on the bathroom door, and he had to hang up. The revelation left me breathless. My son wanted out of his situation. But did that mean he was ready to take responsibility for his actions? Or was this just another manipulation? I've been researching, I said slowly, about coercive control and abusive relationships. It's possible for someone to be both victim and perpetrator. Timothy may be controlled by Heather, but he's still responsible for his own actions toward me. That's exactly what he said. Michael looked surprised. When I talked to him again yesterday, we met at his office during lunch. He said, I can't blame everything on Heather. I did things I knew were wrong, and I have to own that. Hope fluttered in my chest, fragile as a newly emerged butterfly. The son I knew, the one with integrity and compassion, still existed somewhere beneath the facade. What does he want to do? James asked, still skeptical. He's afraid, Michael admitted. Afraid of Heather's reaction if he leaves. Afraid of legal consequences for what they've done. Afraid of facing everyone he's hurt, especially you, Mrs. Campbell. But mostly, he's afraid for his child. He doesn't want his baby raised in this environment, but he's terrified Heather will use the child as a weapon if he tries to leave. His concerns are valid, I acknowledged. Leaving an emotionally abusive relationship is dangerous, and having a child involved makes it infinitely more complicated. We spent the next hour discussing options. Michael offered his home as a safe place for Timothy if he decided to leave. James, ever practical, suggested consulting with my attorney about potential legal protections for both Timothy and his unborn child. I focused on emotional support, how to help Timothy rebuild his identity and confidence if he took this difficult step. There's one more thing, Michael said, as our meeting was wrapping up. Tim wanted me to give you this. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from my son, the first direct communication I'd received from him in months. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it and read, Mom, I don't have the courage yet to say these things to your face, but I need you to know them. I'm sorry. Those words are entirely inadequate for what I've done, but they're the only place I know to start. I betrayed you in the worst possible ways. I lied to you, about you, and for reasons I'm only beginning to understand. I won't blame Heather for my actions. Yes, She manipulated and controlled me, but I allowed it. I participated. I convinced myself the ends justified the means. I told myself we were protecting you from yourself, but the truth is, we were trying to take what wasn't ours to take. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even asking for it yet. What I'm asking for is time. Time to figure out how to leave safely. Time to prepare for my child. Time to become someone worthy of being your son again. When I saw you at the restaurant, I recognized the mother I've always known. The one who loved me unconditionally but expected me to do the right thing. I'm trying to find my way back to being the son who deserved that love. Timothy. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. James took the letter gently from my hands and read it himself, his expression softening slightly. It's a start, he conceded. But words are easy. Actions are what matter now. I know, I agreed. But it's the first honest communication I've had from my son in years. That has to count for something. As we left the cafe, I felt a cautious optimism taking root. The situation remained complicated and painful, but for the first time, I could envision a path forward, not back to what was, but toward something new that honored truth while allowing for healing. My son was trying to find his way home, not to my house, but to himself. And despite everything, I would be waiting when he arrived. April arrived with spring rain and unexpected developments. Timothy began meeting regularly with Michael, strategizing his exit from the marriage while preparing for the birth of his child. He consulted with a divorce attorney who specialized in high-conflict situations and documented Heather's controlling behaviors. He opened his own bank account, secured important documents, and began rebuilding connections with friends Heather had isolated him from. All of this happened in secret, away from Heather's watchful eyes. Timothy wasn't ready to face me directly yet, but Michael kept me informed of his progress. I respected this boundary, understanding that Timothy needed to reclaim his independence before attempting to repair our relationship. Then, on a stormy Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, I found Heather standing on my porch, her pregnancy now visibly showing beneath her expensive raincoat. Her expression was a mixture of anger and something else. Fear, perhaps. "We need to talk," she announced, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. For a moment, I considered asking her to leave, citing the restraining order that technically prevented her from approaching me. But curiosity and concern for my unborn grandchild kept me silent as I closed the door behind her. "Timothy's been acting strange," she began, pacing my living room like a caged animal. "Secretive, distant, missing time he can't account for." "Sound familiar, Eleanor?" "I haven't seen Timothy," I said truthfully, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. "Don't lie to me," Heather snapped. "I know you've been poisoning him against me. You and your brother, and that friend of his, Michael. You've never accepted me, never believed I was good enough for your precious son." "This isn't about me accepting you," I replied, maintaining my composure. "This is about how you've both treated me." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You've been manipulating Timothy his entire life. I just helped him see it. Helped him break free from your control. By controlling him yourself?" I asked quietly, her face flushed with anger. "I protected him. From you? From your interference? From your smothering love? He was weak when I met him, always seeking your approval, always putting your needs above his own. I made him stronger." "Is that what you call it?" I asked. "Isolating him from family and friends? Monitoring his phone? Telling him what to think and feel? That's not strength, Heather. That's control." "You know nothing about our relationship," she hissed. "I know enough," I replied. "I know about the forged documents, the attempts to have me declared incompetent, the financial manipulation." Heather's expression shifted, a calculating look replacing her rage. "That was Timothy's idea, not mine. He's the one who suggested getting power of attorney. He's the one who practiced your signature. I just supported his decisions. The blatant lie might have worked months ago, when I was still doubting my perceptions. But now, I saw through her. We both know that's not true," I said firmly. Before she could respond, the front door opened and James walked in, stopping abruptly when he saw Heather. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, moving protectively to my side. "There's a restraining order." "We're just talking," I assured him, though I was grateful for his arrival. Well, the conversation's over, James stated. You need to leave, Heather, before I call the police. Heather's face contorted with renewed anger. You've always hated me. Always been jealous of what Timothy and I have. Well, it won't work. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. Timothy belongs with me. We're having a baby. A family. You're just a bitter old man who couldn't keep his own wife. James didn't take the bait. The restraining order applies to phone calls and texts, too. No more anonymous messages to Eleanor. No more spreading lies about her mental state. Or what? Heather challenged. You'll have me arrested? While I'm pregnant? That would make a great headline, wouldn't it? Elderly woman has pregnant daughter-in-law jailed. Is that really the image you want, Eleanor? Before either of us could respond, the door opened again. Timothy stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his face pale but determined. Heather, he said quietly, what are you doing here? She spun toward him, momentarily thrown off balance by his appearance. Timothy, I came to talk to your mother, to try to work things out for the baby's sake. Her voice had transformed instantly, becoming soft and placating. Don't, Timothy said, his voice firmer than I'd heard in years. Don't lie. Not anymore. What are you talking about? Heather's voice rose an octave. I'm trying to fix things, to bring the family together before our child is born. Timothy shook his head slowly. You violated the restraining order. You came here to confront my mother, probably to threaten her. I know because I saw you leave the house. I followed you here. The revelation hung in the air between them. Heather's mask slipped completely, revealing naked fury beneath. You followed me? You're spying on me now? After everything I've done for you? She stepped toward Timothy, finger pointed accusingly. I saved you from this toxic family. I gave you strength. I'm giving you a child. And this is how you repay me? By sneaking around behind my back? Timothy didn't flinch. Yes, I've been sneaking around, meeting with Michael, talking to a lawyer, preparing to leave. The words seemed to physically strike Heather. She staggered slightly, her hand moving protectively to her stomach. You can't leave me, she whispered, strategy shifting visibly. I'm carrying your child. I'm not leaving my child, Timothy clarified. I'm leaving you. And I'll fight for custody when the time comes. No one will give you custody, Heather snarled, desperation entering her voice. Not when they hear how you conspired to steal from your own mother. How you forged documents in her name. How you tried to have her declared incompetent. I have proof, Timothy. Emails, texts, the power of attorney with your handwriting. It was all your idea, remember? I watched my son's face, fearing he would crumble under these threats. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. You mean like this proof? He asked, pressing play on a recording. Heather's voice filled the room. Just sign it the way I showed you. Once we have power of attorney, we can handle the house sale whether she agrees or not. The doctor's already on board to sign the competency evaluation. Timothy's recorded voice. I don't know, Heather. This feels wrong. Heather again. Do you want to end up with nothing? Your mother's confused, Timothy. She's making bad decisions. We're protecting her and ourselves. Just sign it. Heather lunged for the phone, but Timothy moved it out of reach. I have more, he said calmly. Lots more. Every conversation where you planned this, where you directed me, where you threatened me if I didn't comply. I've been recording for months. That's illegal, Heather cried. Actually, James interjected, in this state, only one party needs to consent to a recording. Timothy consented. Heather's composure shattered completely. She began screaming accusations, threats, profanities. She knocked a lamp from a side table, sending it crashing to the floor. She threatened to ruin Timothy, to ensure he never saw their child, to tell everyone he was abusive. Through it all, Timothy remained unnaturally calm, as though watching a storm from behind glass. His detachment seemed to further enrage Heather, whose voice grew louder and more hysterical. The commotion brought my neighbors outside. Someone must have called the police, because minutes later, 2 officers arrived at my door. What's going on here? The first officer asked, taking in the broken lamp and Heather's red face. She attacked me, Heather immediately claimed, pointing at me. She pushed me. I could have fallen. I'm pregnant. That's not what happened, James stated firmly. Mrs. Heather Campbell is violating a restraining order by being here. She entered without permission and became violent when asked to leave. The second officer, a woman, approached Heather with professional concern. Ma'am, why don't you sit down? You seem upset, and in your condition, you should try to stay calm. While her partner handled Heather, the first officer took statements from James, Timothy, and me. Timothy presented the restraining order documentation and explained the situation briefly, including Heather's history of manipulation. She needs help, he said quietly. Real psychological help. I don't want to press charges, but I can't have her around my mother anymore. Unfortunately, the officer explained, violating a restraining order is a criminal offense. We'll need to take her in, at least to process the violation. She's pregnant, Timothy said, conflict evident on his face. The station has medical personnel on staff, the female officer assured him. She'll be monitored carefully. As the officers prepared to escort Heather out, she made one final desperate attempt. Timothy, please, she begged, her voice breaking. Don't let them take me. Think of our baby. Think of everything we've built together. I love you. You know I love you. For a moment, I feared Timothy might waver. The emotional manipulation was powerful, especially with his unborn child involved. But he straightened his shoulders and spoke with quiet conviction. I'm thinking of our baby, he said. That's why things need to change. The officers led Heather away, her threats and pleas fading as they helped her into the police car. When they were gone, Timothy, James, and I stood in awkward silence in my living room, the broken lamp a fitting metaphor for our fractured family. I should go too, Timothy finally said. I need to call my lawyer, figure out next steps. You could stay here, I offered hesitantly. He shook his head. Not yet. I'm not ready, and you're not either. We have a lot to work through. But we will work through it? I couldn't keep the question from my voice. Timothy met my eyes directly for the first time in years. Yes, he promised. We will. After he left, James helped me clean up the broken lamp. Neither of us spoke much, processing the dramatic confrontation we'd just witnessed. Do you believe him? James finally asked. About working things out? I considered the question carefully. I believe he wants to. But recovery, from the relationship with Heather, from his own choices, it won't be linear. There will be setbacks. And forgiveness? James pressed. After everything he's done? That won't be linear either, I admitted. But it has to start somewhere. The rain continued outside, washing the world clean, while inside, the first fragile seeds of reconciliation had been planted. 6 months after the confrontation in my living room, I sat on the porch of my new home, a cozy 2-bedroom cottage near the lake. The autumn leaves blazed orange and red against the clear blue sky as I rocked gently in the white wicker chair Robert had restored decades ago, one of the few pieces I'd kept from our old house. The sale of the family home had gone smoothly once Timothy withdrew his objections. The proceeds allowed me to buy this smaller place outright and invest the remainder for my future. James had helped me move, organizing family members to pack and transport my carefully curated possessions. Not everything from the old house, just what truly mattered to me now. Timothy was making progress in therapy, attending twice-weekly sessions to address both the trauma of his relationship with Heather and his own actions toward me. We met every Sunday afternoon, sometimes at my house, sometimes at a neutral location like the park, rebuilding our relationship one careful conversation at a time. Heather had been charged with violating the restraining order and attempted financial elder abuse. Given her pregnancy, the judge had sentenced her to probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment rather than jail time. The divorce proceedings were underway, complicated by the baby due in 2 months. I'm scared I'll be like her, Timothy had confessed during one of our recent meetings. That I'll be controlling or manipulative with the baby. The fact that you're worried about it means you probably won't be, I'd assured him. You're doing the work, Timothy. You're facing your patterns and changing them. James remained skeptical but supportive. He joined us occasionally for our Sunday meetings, his presence both a comfort to me and a reminder to Timothy of the consequences of his actions. The brothers-in-law relationship would take even longer to repair than the mother-son bond. Family dynamics had shifted permanently. Some relatives, like Barbara, maintained that I had overreacted to normal family conflicts. They kept their distance, occasionally sending pointed holiday cards addressed only to Eleanor rather than Aunt Eleanor or Grandma Eleanor. Small linguistic jabs meant to diminish my family status. But many others had recognized the manipulation at work and made amends for believing the lies. Stephanie and her parents had become regular visitors to my new home. My cousin Linda and her partner Susan helped me establish a container garden on my small patio. Thomas and Catherine invited me for dinner monthly. These connections were precious to me now, valued rather than taken for granted. I'd learned to distinguish between those who truly cared for my well-being and those who merely performed family obligation. Timothy lived in a small apartment near his office, preparing a nursery in the second bedroom. He'd shown me photos of the crib he'd assembled, the changing table he'd painted yellow, the bookshelf already filled with children's classics. "I want you to be part of the baby's life," he'd told me. "Whatever form that takes, however much or little you're comfortable with after everything that's happened." "I want that too," I'd replied, but with clear boundaries. Boundaries had become my watchword. I no longer accepted behavior that made me uncomfortable, even from those I loved. I no longer silenced my concerns to keep the peace. I no longer doubted my own perceptions when something felt wrong. Dr. Chen had helped me understand that healthy boundaries weren't walls, but rather doorways, defining where one person ended and another began, allowing for connection without invasion. "The greatest gift you can give Timothy now," she'd advised during one of our final sessions, "is to model healthy boundaries. Show him what it looks like to love without controlling, to support without enabling." I'd taken her words to heart, learning to say no without guilt and yes with genuine enthusiasm rather than obligation. Michael had become an unexpected addition to our restructured family circle. His loyalty to Timothy during the darkest times had proven his worth, and his easy humor brought lightness to gatherings that might otherwise have been weighed down by history. "I always wanted a family like yours," he'd commented once, helping me plant tulip bulbs along my front walkway. "Like mine?" I'd laughed incredulously. "With all our drama and trauma?" "No," he'd clarified, tamping down the soil. "One that fights to stay together even when it's hard. One that tells the truth, even when it hurts. One that believes in second chances." His words had brought tears to my eyes, helping me see that perhaps, in our broken and rebuilding state, we were offering something valuable after all. James and I had grown even closer through the ordeal. He'd sold his house and bought a small place just a 10-minute walk from mine, close enough for regular visits, but far enough for independence. We had standing breakfast dates on Wednesday mornings and watched old movies together on Saturday nights. He'd started dating again, a lovely widow he'd met at a community garden, and I delighted in seeing him find joy after his difficult divorce. As for me, I'd discovered unexpected freedom in this new chapter. I joined a book club at the local library, volunteered teaching English to recent immigrants, and even taken up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for during my busy years of work and child rearing. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my reflections. Timothy stood on the porch steps, his face thinner and more serious than in his youth, but increasingly reminiscent of the son I remembered. "Right on time," I smiled, rising to greet him. "I brought lunch," he said, holding up a bag from my favorite sandwich shop, "and something else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "The latest ultrasound. It's a girl." My heart swelled. "A granddaughter. Have you thought about names?" I asked as we settled at the small table on the porch. "I was thinking about Rose," Timothy said. "After Dad's mother. She would have loved that," I replied, touched by his choice to honor family even after everything. We ate our sandwiches, discussing ordinary things. Timothy's work project, my painting class, the neighbor's new puppy. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, though occasional moments of tension still arose when certain topics brushed too close to painful history. "I saw Heather yesterday," Timothy mentioned as we finished eating. "At the doctor's appointment. She seems better. The medication is helping. She actually apologized for some things." "That's good," I said carefully. "For her and for the baby." "I don't trust it completely," he admitted. "Her therapist says she has a long way to go." But it's a start. I nodded, appreciating his cautious approach. The Timothy of 2 years ago would have grasped at any sign of change, desperate to believe in easy resolution. This Timothy had learned to observe without immediately reacting, to hope without abandoning reality. "Mom," he said after a pause, "I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. For everything. For the documents, the lies, the things I said to you and about you. There's no excuse." "Thank you," I replied simply. We had covered this ground before, would likely cover it many more times. Healing wasn't a single moment, but a continuous process. "I don't know if I'll ever understand how I let things get so far," he continued. "How I became someone who could hurt you that way. We all have capabilities within us we don't recognize until we're tested," I said. "The capacity for cruelty and the capacity for change. You've demonstrated both." He winced but nodded, accepting the hard truth without defensiveness. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch, I reflected on our journey. The family that gathered around my Thanksgiving table this year would be smaller than in the past. The conversations would sometimes still carry undercurrents of unresolved pain. Trust was rebuilding slowly, like a bone that had been badly broken. But there was authenticity now that had been missing before. There was truth, even when it wasn't pretty. There were genuine connections rather than obligatory performances of family harmony. Perhaps that was the unexpected gift in this painful chapter. The stripping away of pretense to reveal what truly mattered. The discovery that real love could survive terrible wounds. The knowledge that forgiveness wasn't forgetting, but rather choosing to see the whole person, flaws and all, and offering them the chance to become better. As Timothy prepared to leave, promising to call me after his next therapy session, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. The future remained uncertain, particularly with a grandchild entering our complicated family dynamic. But uncertainty no longer terrified me. I had weathered the worst storm of my life and emerged, not unchanged, but unbroken. Family was indeed about loyalty, not blind loyalty that enabled harm, but the deeper loyalty of believing someone could be better than their worst actions, of holding space for growth while protecting oneself from further injury, of recognizing that love sometimes meant setting boundaries rather than tearing them down. That night, as I prepared for bed in my new home, I thought about all of you watching who might be navigating your own family betrayals or difficult boundaries. If my story has resonated with you in any way, please leave a comment sharing your experience or what helped you through. Each journey is unique, but knowing we're not alone makes the path a little easier to walk. If you found value in hearing how I reclaimed my dignity and rebuilt on my own terms, please consider subscribing and sharing this with someone who might need to hear it. I'm sending strength to anyone still in the middle of their storm. There is sunshine waiting, even if you can't see it yet. Thank you for witnessing my story with such compassion. Until next time, this is Eleanor, still learning and growing at 67.